Like many others in the United States, I have grown up in two cultures: the hereditary culture passed on and nurtured by my displaced post-World War II refugee family from Ukraine, and the culture of the United States, which is the country I was born in and raised and continue to live and work. And in my creative work, I strive to share my own particular cultural frame of reference, and in so doing, touch the common core of all humanity. And my art making, in its many forms, is meant to evoke a longing, express wonder, and also invite discourse among the viewers about our place in the world. As I think Rebecca said, I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and I grew up in a multi-generation Ukrainian community, including all four grandparents. During my formative years, they had a great influence on me. The photograph that you see to the right of the map is the first trip to Ukraine that Michael and I took in 1991. I had received an IREX grant, as Rebecca had said, and it was a turning point for me and Michael. This trip opened my eyes and soul to a long-suffering yet hopeful people, to a land beautiful but ravaged by the Soviet system. And it was a turning point in my work and my worldview. A concern with the human condition, always at the heart of my art, took new form and urgency, and I vowed to bear witness in my art making through text and imagery, to address cultural, social, political issues. And this exhibition, called Lamentations, has a selection of works created far since 1991. They are my continuing visual meditations and documentations of pivotal past and current events. My family were the subjects of my drawings. And drawing is one of the basic concerns and interests that have remained constant in my work throughout the years. Mark making, whether it's traditional or not, whether it's mixed media or pencil and charcoal. My grandparents spent a lot of time with me, and I with them when my parents worked. My mother's mother was a teacher, principal, that's on the left, and my father's father was a Ukrainian UART priest. They were allowed to marry. And my mother's father, with a jaunty hat, was a judge. He studied law in Prague, and in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, he was on the court. But when he was a refugee in the United States, he worked at a steel plant and then ran a radio station, which was put on a Ukrainian language radio station once a week on Sundays. So I spent time with him and his wife, my grandmother. The drawing that I did of her was from life and from photos, and also the very few photos that she brought from Ukraine, including the one behind her as a young woman. I tell you that I've been interested in cultural, social, political issues, but before 1991, my art making was not addressed to that. And I wasn't particularly dealing with Ukrainian themes. I didn't mix media. It never even occurred to me. Painting was painting and drawing was drawing. Though I spoke and read in Ukrainian and experienced Ukrainian folk art, literature, and participated in community events, my early artwork was centered on the figure, just the human figure, particularly the face, often my own, the locus of the soul. And I was always interested in the human condition, not a likeness. I really was after capturing a state of being. And this is an example of that in drawing, and then as a study for the painting. This particular painting also has the title of the Madonna Complex. So the titles are very important to me, and I'm happy that in this exhibition the titles are right next to the artwork because they give a clue. This painting is on the cover of the monograph that was published in Ukraine in 2005. And these are just a few examples that I have kept of paintings that included me and or those close to me. And they were done during the era of the women's movement. And so the titles will give you an idea what they were about. The Byzantine kitchen trap is on the left, and the death of machismo is on the right. So the left really refers to a lot of the icons that I saw and loved in Ukrainian churches, and the icon conceit in general, with the averted eyes and the martyrdom depicted here. And then the pink tones in the fingers and the petals of the flower and the toes, the feminization of machismo. So Michael was kind enough to actually pose for me there and said that he was very grateful, but that's the last time he wants to do that. So, and these last portraits, which I still don't really call them portraits, but they were paintings that included very close friends. On the left, the title is The Vessel, and it is of Elizabeth Polivka, a very good friend of mine who was a ceramist, and her openness is indicated by her gesture, and her work surrounds her, including the small pinch pots on the window kind of frame, and that's in the University of Houston collection. The painting next to that is actually called My Story, and it was my story that I was capturing when I posed at a beautiful archaeological site in Olbia on the Black Sea, which has been ravaged now. Unfortunately for me, this painting was in Ukraine and it has stayed there, and I don't know its whereabouts, but I'm happy to have the photograph of it. After my first trip to Ukraine, my studio work began in fits and starts. I worked a lot in isolation and was following the news of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. I had no great plan for my artwork. I just knew that I could not go back to what I had been doing, which was the portraits, the figure paintings. And so I was compelled to bear witness and began collecting print news and archival information about Ukrainians' tragic history, including the Holodomor, the 1932-33 famine genocide instigated by Stalin in Ukraine. This piece it does not really address the Holodomor, but it's called Witnesses, and it was my leap into tackling very large paintings. I think it's about 8 feet at least high, and it's a diptych. On the left is a piece of wood that has been covered with Soviet propaganda and torched, and then laid over with paint and resins. At the foot are shards of pottery from an archaeological site that was abandoned. On the right, on canvas, is a mixture of painting, charcoal, and wax. And this was the beginning of mixing media, which is just a normal process for me now. Also, lifting from art history, the central figure of the slave is a version of Michelangelo's slave. And on the right, there are images that are taken from Italian artists. They are guarding the treasures that are still probably unfound in burial spots throughout Ukraine. The title here is Heads Toward the Light. And it was, again, it's a riff on Caravaggio. Might as well work with the giants. And the severed head here is mine. Also, it was the first time that I actually attached objects to the surface of the painting. And in this case, it's a dried resin sunflower on either side. Right now, I have a large collage in my studio that I will be working with, and the form that I will be using will be the sunflower. So this is so much earlier than that, because Ukraine has fields of sunflowers, and there is a magical presence, and it is symbolic of regeneration. Another venture in mixed media was these gates, and I finished them shortly after my 1991 trip. This was a collaborative project with Betty Polivka, whose portrait I painted. She provided the clay and fired the clay. They are a riff on the gates that separate the people in the church from the sacristy in Byzantine churches. But it's not carved wood, it's not gold-leafed. The images are sacred and profane, and if you saw the gates, you'd have to figure that out yourself, which was which, and they're made of clay. And right now, they reside in our house. I turned toward my family heirlooms and like embroideries, and melded these with my recent experience of Ukraine. And I assembled seemingly disparate materials, objects of handiwork like embroidery, ceramics, lead, and incorporated them into composition by sewing and mixing organic and inert material. I was expanding my repertoire of painting and drawing to include stitching, torching, weaving, felting, gold leafing, tearing and cutting, sculpting, sanding, piecing things together, tearing them apart, and piecing them together again. And I worked on sculptural reliefs, which were independent three-dimensional structures, not wall-dependent. So here, the first is wings, the second is called guardian, and a life mask of my own face is impressed into the composition. It's like I am imprinting myself on this Ukrainian culture, one way or another. The one that is guardian, that has her wings spread, actually includes pillows embroidered by both my grandmothers, and inside the pillows are various correspondences of theirs, letters that they sent to me, and especially when I was in college. They are beautiful cursive calligraphy, I would call them. And they are accessible, and also this particular piece can be sitting on a pedestal, the wings can be covering her, and I really enjoyed having that kind of freedom with some of the objects. They are, in a way, interactive, and they don't have to assume the same design each time. So again, this is another way I was imprinting myself on this culture. You can get it by the titles. The top is Ingesting Culture. It uses photocopies of my hands and face, and I press them together with the pressed leaves and plants from Ukraine, which I illegally brought over, pressed in books. So I hope nobody's going to arrest me now. And then Ambiguous Gift below captures the ambiguity I felt often in accepting a priceless gift of an inherited ancestral identity. And I would say yes, no, yes, no. Yes, this is great. No, it's not. It's too hard. Yeah, back and forth. Images of children. Oh, the first series. This is the first series of works on paper that I did devoted to the event called Holodomor. Holodomor in Ukrainian means death by starvation. And this refers to the 1932-33 genocide. And the series was called Fragments. And they were just that, fragments. They were small scraps of paper the size of letter paper, direct, immediate, and usually carried a piece of reports from liturgical, literary, or other sources. And I really copied or did a riff of artists that I admired. So obviously the Goya is on the left, and also on the right I used the Christian Byzantine conceit in icons, in iconology. But in the case on the right, I started photocopying archival photographs of the victims of the Holodomor, mostly children, and using them, weaving them with actual Christian images and creating different kinds of icons. They are not icons. I don't mean to be sacrilegious in this, but there were 33 of them, and in each one there was a photographic image of a child. And they extended to look like this, also incorporating embroidery and carved wood frames. Images of children. This is from another series that was my memories of children that I had seen in orphanages near Chernobyl. Because 10 years after the nuclear accident, I had occasion to visit the Chernobyl zone. But I would like to read to you what I wrote at that time about these children that were really not from photographs. They were not particular children. They were composites that I made up. And there were about 10 of these. They also were put into frames so that they looked like they were looking out of a window or a doorway. So I wrote, "For me, these paintings are about yearning and love. They are layered, invoked images of the innocent, inhabiting worlds of fragility, wounded beauty, tenderness, and their seeking communion. They suggest the wonder and awe of the unfinished. Their faces are vestiges of painting's visceral markings, the scribbles, the blots, the wipes, the scrapes, the daubs." And fellow artist John Holika wrote about them, "The gift-wrapped girls suggest this indelible image of innocence, vulnerability, and natural charm." These faces for me sometimes resembled the Holodomor victims' faces that I had used in my art. But more currently, they really relate to the faces that I saw among the Ukrainian refugees during my residency in Poland. I saw them through train windows, through lace curtains, through the windows of their dwellings. And I imagine that those images of the innocent will assert themselves in my work again, but not in the manner of earlier painting. So I show you the one painting of the red hood girl and an earlier painting of Michael, which is very different in tone. Okay, now we're closer to the work that is represented in this show. And especially for students, I wanted to show you the older work because I feel that the evolution of a person involved in art making does happen. And what you are engaged in doing doesn't mean that that is something that you will be doing for the rest of your life. And you have to be open to what life uncovers and how it unfolds. So there is nothing that I would change with the kind of work that I did because they led to these works. So these are collectively called nests, and they are grouped, there are 4 of them in the show. They're very small because the size is dictated by the objects that they are inspired by. So for instance, the baby bird opens its beak to take in what it's being fed. And what it's being fed is a Russian ruble, and the nest is made up of Russian imagery. The next one is called, I have to remind myself, All That Glitters Is Not Gold. A spider lures the greedy into its shiny nest, but it's full of worthless ruble notes. On the left is the titled work Nest Eggs, and it refers to the worthless nest egg that was built on worthless currency. And the one next to it is simply called Wake Up. So it calls people in Ukraine to wake up to their new reality. This is a map of a particular place in Ukraine. And of course, the sleeping animal, because I started using animals to portray human follies and such, is a squirrel. It happens to be my favorite animal. So the squirrel figures a lot. And speaking of nests, there are the nesting dolls, or matryoshkas. And I received 3 sets from students who wrongly thought that there was something close to me. So I immediately sanded them down and repainted them and collaborated with a friend of mine who is a miracle felter, and she felted bears and a rat, which I don't have a picture of here. And the wordplay was interesting for me because the first title of the first work is Bear T parentheses Hugs. So if you take out the T, it's Bear Hugs. If you insert the T, then it's Bear Thugs. And so we know who the bear is, and the thugs are there, and their names all end in IN. Putin, Stalin, Lenin, Rasputin, Vermin. So surprisingly enough, this was bought. And now it's in a collector's, in a plastic box, safe and sound, but also the viewer, if they choose, they can walk around it. And the back of these matryoshka dolls, these thugs, is something that is worth seeing. And most people don't know what it is, except they do. So, and then the other one is called Bear Skin with a S in parentheses. So it's about bear kin, the family of this bear that is Russia. And the Russia holds the baby friend of, and I think that I got it close enough that you can recognize the child here. And inside of that bear is the rest of the kin. I glued it shut though, so. And now, very quickly, I'm just going to run through some slides. See, I say slide, I'm sorry, images of paintings that are part of the Hide and Seek series that really started with this process of mine of collecting news articles, photos, and cultural artifacts that address specific themes that I wanted to explore in depth. So I first select, and from my stash that I have collected, and collage certain entries onto paper or canvas. And that creates a ground upon which I draw and paint metaphoric imagery. And the imagery evolves through the painting by adding and subtracting and layering words and images. I use charcoal, oil, and wax, and resins. And at the same time as I'm doing this, I am examining the nature of print media, how information is disseminated, what is revealed, and what is concealed. And this is an important thing to watch for, especially in these times, the perversion of news. So this has to do with the Iraq War, and it was a show in College of the Mainland. Here, the piece on the right is called Barren Fruit. It's 105 inches high, charcoal, chalk, acrylic, and it is in the Museum of South Texas at Corpus Christi. It's about the Orange Revolution in Ukraine and its aftermath, which was not as rosy as one would have hoped. Hearts of Buston, about the Iraq War. And I wanted to share with you some of my studio, what it looks like at any given time. So the exhibition of these three free-flowing, like curtains, pieces of trees were at Beeville Museum. And then in the studio, this is what I was working. This is how they look and what the ladders are doing there. So this piece is in this exhibition. Will the Grass Grow Over It? It is about the Holodomor, and I invite you to look at it more closely from a distance, and get close, get the macro and the micro, and there is wall text explaining some of the history. Here you can see it in my studio, just the collage on black linen, and the words that I had taken vinyl letters and organized to the left of it on the wall, which was affixed to the canvas and melded into the paint of wax, pigmented wax and oil. So you can see kind of a close-up of what that looks like. And as I say, it's here. This piece is at Hobby Airport, the City of Houston collection. I haven't seen it at Hobby yet, but a friend sent me a photograph of it there. So it is there. And it's called Fire and Ice. And it has to do with the revolution on the Maidan in 2014, after which Russia invaded eastern Ukraine and Crimea. This work is called And Europe Was Silent, and it has to do with the takeover of Crimea, and it's here. Another piece that uses thorns as a barrier, it's called Thorns and Floating Idols, IDOLS, the Soviet ones. This was from UART.GALLERY, and then it was in an exhibition with the trilogy, as I call it, at the Galveston Art Center. This is another view of the Galveston Art Center show. And here is the Pandemic Lamentations Part 3. It's here in the gallery in a corner, but you see the setup in my studio below. As I was working on it, it was spread all across the back wall. And the director, curator of UART.GALLERY had the idea to put it in a corner, which I can't imagine it now not being in a corner. A view of me with this work choker, which is in this show. And the reason that this is poignant and for me is that the drawing of my grandmother is on the left. Now this is a real challenge when I look at that picture because this is what I have in the studio now. It's an enormous collage of the war I put it together before I left for Poland for the Fulbright. And when I returned, there it is. And it documents the beginning of the war, and then it ends in May 2022. So just a little bit of the war. At that time, I left thinking that it would soon be over. And what, on the right you see a mock-up. I had been drawing and thinking of how to situate silhouettes of flowers, stems of sunflowers. And this is the one that I chose, and I think I will start working on the collage with those forms. So this is, I'm ending with this particular image of what may be the work later. And I invite you, actually, I hope to get this done within a year, but I am due to have a solo show at a gallery in Houston in January, February. So I would be very happy if you came to see it, because the theme, the subject matter, as I can foresee, is sunflowers turning toward the light. I want to have this as a documentation, a cathartic kind of memorialization of events that have happened. And I select images and text, and I take great care in doing that. They have to sort of work as a design, and just an abstract design, but also carry a story. So, and then I photograph it before I put anything on it. So the large collage that is on the wall, a videographer took a video of me while I was working on it in the other space. So I have documentation of a very unique kind, and she made it into a video that is like an art video for her. And at first I was hesitant, because I thought, how interesting is me being on my knees with knee pads, with the newspapers on the floor, and I'm cutting them and arranging them, and you know, how interesting is that? But she managed to do it. It's a short video, because the sound, the only sound is the sound of cutting and a rustling of paper and my shuffling around. And she tried to avoid my backside, so I appreciated that. But you know, I don't know if I answered your question, but I mean, I document and I try to have, at least in a photograph, what is underneath, but it gets layered. And then sometimes I erase or take it back, but I'm not really clear. Even this study, which is a study, the actual adaptation to the big collage might change it. Yeah, no, they're real, they're actual, and then I seal it, but they yellow, you know, and I know that. It's like Anselm Kiefer knows what's going to be happening to his work, so I do it knowingly, and I started using actual objects from my first trip to Ukraine. I wanted the actual thing, not my transliteration. That's why I started doing assemblages. I didn't want to paint embroideries. I wanted embroideries there. And I didn't want to photocopy newspaper. I wanted the actual newspaper with the type, you know, with their typeset and all of that.
Well, I mean, it's a great honor for me to be able to say a few words after the presentation that Lydia gave about her lifetime work. And I'm honored to be the person to say a few words. It's difficult to summarize all the things that she already told you, and you've learned about the work that she's been doing many years. But I want to tell you that I am grateful, to God that I know Lydia and I know Michael, her husband, and they've been doing enormous amount of work in promoting Ukraine at the time when people didn't know much about Ukraine. With her work, with different activities that we're organizing here in the 80s and the 90s here in Houston, and in broader area in Ohio and in other places. And they've been both born outside of Ukraine. But the connection that they have with Ukraine, this ancestral connection with the history, with tradition of Ukraine. Not many people probably in Ukraine, because of all of those repressions, had this connection to the history and culture like Lydia and Michael do. And you can see from the works that she was doing in the course of the years that she always devoted her works to historically important events for Ukraine, or socially important events in our society. That when you look at those works, you can feel emotions. And as Lydia said, everybody can interpret the painting differently depending on each person's background or position on certain things, but it definitely evokes a lot of emotion. It makes you think. It makes you ask questions. And it makes you able to relate to those events that happened probably many years ago, or even happening right now, or some of us experience, like the work with the pandemic, or the works devoted to the Russia's invasion, aggression against Ukraine. It is still ongoing for 2 years onwards. And when looking at those works, you can relate, you can read the articles, you can recollect in your memory what were you doing at that time? What were your thoughts at that time? What are your thoughts now? How do you feel about it today? So these works, they make you feel those events, be part of them. And I'm very honored to know Lydia and Michael, and to be able to be here with you today. And I please invite you after we finish the official part, spend time, look at the works. Lydia gave you the background, how to work with them, how to interpret, to understand them. Look at them from different angles. And we will also be here if you would be willing, interested to learn more about Ukraine, about what's happening. I'm here, would be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you so much. Thank you to Lydia.
Thank you.